Hello, and welcome to this week's In Conversation. My name is Phil Jackman, and I lead on CyberNorth, Dynamo Northeast Cybersecurity Cluster. Each week, I'm talking to people in the Northeast cybersecurity industry. And today, I'm joined by Robert Campbell from Ecommnet. Hi, Robert. How are you?
Hi, Phil. I'm good, thanks. Yeah.
Excellent. Good to see you again. But anyway, can you start by telling us then a bit about yourself and your company, Ecommnet?
So my background is quite mixed, really, and long. I started out at university studying engineering, indeed agricultural engineering, and ended up spending the first part of my career as a production engineer, working for all sorts of different people. Coming in basically at the end of the 80s, middle of the 80s, getting bored and wanted to change career. I had been playing around with computers and microprocessors at home, decided that IT was a good thing. I got a job, moved back up to Newcastle, having moved all the way down to London. I made my way back up north, and spent 15 years or so working for 2 or 3 different consultancy businesses as the IT industry as we now know it was emerging. So one of the first implementations of Exchange, Microsoft Exchange, on Windows NT at the time, at that level of things, when we were still using ISDN connectivity to try and get onto the internet, just moving away from dial-up modems and bulletin boards and stuff like that. So I've been through all of that old history, and eventually got headhunted by what was then a big consultancy company based in Sunderland, and I took something like 7 of my colleagues with me from my present employer. That seemed to. We were then sort of setting up ourselves as a network business. We'd be putting in internet connections and firewalls, and normally based on ISDN or leased line type connectors. I wanted to pursue a Microsoft strategy, as I felt that at that time that's where everybody would be going. The company then said, actually, we think SAP is the way for us to go. And at that point, we parted company because I didn't believe SAP was something that I wanted to be in. I wanted to be in this new PC-based computer world. And at the time, it was having just moved from my previous employers. It was about 18 months into employment with a new company. There was I'd already built up a reasonable customer base across that 18 months. We were turning over the division I was working with. It was a couple of million quid's worth of work. So I went round to most of my customers and said, look, I have no idea what to do, but the meetings that we went to aren't going to work. And I said, well, we're buying from you, Robert, rather than anybody else. And it was that kind of light bulb moment which said, on a Friday night, you've always said in the pub after work, I could do it better myself. Well, now's the chance to do it better yourself. So I basically formed a company at the time. The company was myself. This was 1998 when we set it up. And I was busy building e-commerce websites for people like Ann Summers, building internet connections and wide area networks based upon ISDN and leased lines for several different companies. A whole mixture of things. Networking and web technology were the main things that we were involved in. And it's been going since then. So with a bit of a hiccup of 2 or 3 years ago, where we downsized, and maybe more of that later. But that was the evolution. I think peak time we were employing 12 people, turnover just under 3 million quid, which is not huge, but at the time I felt I've done something right at that point.
Excellent. And well, I think it's fairly obvious, but how did cybersecurity then, as we know it today, I suppose probably was a twinkle in his father's eye at the time that you was done, how did that become part of your equation?
I think the main thing was to do with building networks for people and the emergence of the internet. It was always in my portfolio, or certainly my interest, to make those connections as secure as possible. So the first involvement was building internet connectivity, a lot of it done with small business and ISDN networks, and fitting routers and firewalls in at that point in time. And firewall technology was just interesting, exciting. It was something that my approach to thinking seemed to work and gel with, and it rolled on from there. There was lots of other things that we talked about, that kind of border between hardware and software systems. So laptop encryption or data encryption, PKI technologies around authentication, and firewall technologies, as they were relatively simple at that point, but certainly that's my background. And it was a specialism that very few other people were into. And the way in which I think about network design and architecture and resilience is always kind of gelled with that. And the interest has always been there. So whatever we've done as an organization has had that solid grounding on top of that approach to the technology. We've done lots of other different things, but that's always been the major. So, and it's still what we're carrying through today. So.
Excellent. I mean, actually, that leads me on to my next question, is that you seem to offer a wide range of services: IT security, strategic consulting, product development. How do you manage to keep on top of the market, which is extremely fast moving?
I think I mentioned earlier about a bit of a change in the last 2 or 3 years. The business was becoming extremely difficult to keep on top of everything. And I have a major issue with two-tier distribution in the UK. Sometimes it works really well, sometimes it works really badly. But for an organisation like ours, at the size that we're at, where businesses are not well served by a technology intelligence-led business like mine, but more about sales volumes and everything else, we found it very difficult to keep on top of absolutely everything at a price point that made it worthwhile. And having educated a market, because of the technology advance that we were able to do and the intelligence-led approach to doing anything, we always found ourselves educating the market space a great deal. So we were the first people to do ISDN bonding. We were the first people to do proper laptop encryption in the UK with some of the technology providers that were in place. Yes, there were lots of other people doing it, but in terms of a holistic approach to doing stuff, we were always, I felt, better than anybody else. But we weren't very good at selling stuff and extracting value when some people walk up and say, look, I can do this at a tenth of the price. And having business bought from under one after doing that becomes extremely difficult as a small business to keep that going. So the changes that we made, we diversified a bit. We spent a lot of time doing e-commerce platforms for some fairly big people occasionally. Rough Guides was one. We ran their web presence for 5 or 6 years non-stop without it ever stopping. Built their e-commerce platform and their ebook publishing platform. But 2.5 years ago, there was a certain downturn in business. A lot of people within the business moved on to bigger and better things. I'd taken guys from university for 5 or 6 or 7 years and gave them a huge amount of experience, but they wanted to move on, and that's a natural thing that we do. Skill shortages and everything else in the Northeast meant actually having that kind of thing happen 2 or 3 years on the trot and finding it difficult to replace people was always going to be difficult. I've just turned 65, so different priorities also for me meant, actually, I don't want to fight this bit anymore. I'm really unhappy with the two-tier distribution model. I'm just going to pick and choose 1 or 2 decent projects a year to do something intelligent with. And if I then looked if I then look to the skill sets that I've got and what we want, it is that overall architecture viewpoint about how to do something, about asking those really awkward questions at the beginning of saying, what do you want to do? How do you want to do it? To try and persuade people to think about their unique selling point, their unique proposition, and not try to implement stuff in that same sentence. And it's really difficult to do.
Speaking of difficult things to do, I understand that you've got your hand in many other pies. You've got your Z-Move, the cycling distribution business, and you're throwing pots and that kind of things. How do you get the balance between these competing priorities?
It's very much on demand. So we downsized the company 2.5 years ago. I've got one big project and one employee doing some product development for an environmental consultancy business in Newcastle at this point in time. We've got some software development going for them as a product development, which has been the most, I was going to say profitable. It's not profitable necessarily, but it's been the most productive piece of software development work we've ever done in the 25 years I've been doing this. And there's just the two of us. I do the architecture, the big pictures on the whiteboard. Chris does all the software development, and we've turned around. The client is absolutely over the moon with what we've done. So I think that's working on its own, and it's a project that's tightly controlled without causing me personally too much distraction. It's allowed me to do other things as well. I do some security consultancy for 2 or 3 companies around the country, some up in the northeast, some down south. And then I've got other things where I want to kind of move to over the next 2 or 3 years, and spend more of my time doing those things. Some of those are personal, as you said. I'm trying to develop my artistry in ceramics. But again, the ethical business around Z-Move, that zero emissions short range distribution company, that's really interesting. Yeah, balance seems to be working out really well at the moment, I think.
Good. So are you noticing any in your cybersecurity or your security consultancy, are you noticing any emerging trends in the market?
Some of the trends I've kind of seen and left behind. The access control across cloud-based solutions, I think, is one where I think has been an emerging platform fought over by several different companies. What is now Thales and was Gemalto, and before that was SafeNet, and that's a company I've been working with for ever since it was Aladdin about 15, 20 years ago in the UK. We worked on authentication, and I see the need for cross-platform federated authentication for people across hybrid systems, that's local networks as well as hybrid cloud-based solutions, is one which is a growing market space at this point.
Indeed.
The other thing I think is a re-emergence of the issue of there's still all those basics there, which is where I think the majority of time and effort should be spent. Let's get the basics right. We've still not got totally clean environments. We've now got a much more complicated environment. We've now got a much more dirty environment in which we've got to live in. And still people are not doing some of the basic housekeeping properly. So I still think that should be the main focus for everybody.
Yeah, I think you're right. In many ways, the market or the setup is becoming more complicated, and in that hybrid model, and so more opportunity. So where's your personal focus at the moment?
Staying alive, lockdown. I think that's the way the major focus is. In terms of work, it's the product development that we're doing at the moment is going through a new phase of new stuff, a new big module that we're doing. So that's getting quite some attention, and it's quite hard to think about some of those things. Getting into some very, very hard things to do. From the security side of things, it's about much more about the PKI type solutions. So we've recently done a project with a company making payment terminals and trying to build in secure mechanisms around their manufacturing process. I've done that in conjunction with a friend of mine who does some of the nitty-gritty stuff on the ground, policy writing and the procedures and the admin, the stuff that I'm not really good at. And I come into it with the technical architecture. So that's still interesting. We've still got some basic work doing with certificate management systems for the NHS in one or two places. That's where we're doing. But increasingly, I find myself thinking about what else to do. Being locked down in this new world imposes a great deal of strain on lots of different things, including one's personal well-being. So I think paying attention to that at this point in time is necessary for everyone.
No, I think you're absolutely right. It's very easy to get sucked into this new paradigm. And I think it's a very interesting point about building security into the manufacturing process. We often think of it as a software issue, but there are hardware issues in terms of cybersecurity. So my last question for you then, because you brought up the subject of lockdown, what's the first thing you're going to do when it's all over?
So I got myself into a habit of going to one or two regional restaurants to eat out. And the kind of restaurants I like are the ones which are not fine dining, more casual dining, mixed with community events and services. And I really miss that, actually. Really decent food, straightforwardly presented, in a good atmosphere with other people enjoying themselves. My younger daughter's a chef, and that's where she works, that kind of place that she works in. Yeah, that's what I'd like to do. Sit down with a beer, long, lazy brunch on a Sunday, set outside somewhere. That's what I miss at the moment.
I couldn't agree with you more. I'm in there, so I'll come and join you if that's okay. Well, thanks very much for that, Robert. I'd also like to thank you for helping to put these in conversations together in the first place. You've been helping us behind the scenes. So look out for the next in our series. And if you're interested in taking part, please get in touch. Thanks, Robert.
Thanks very much indeed, Phil.